Several, dozens of people spontaneously combust each year. It's just not really widely reported.
Right.
Yeah.
You're listening to Binnall of America Audio.
If I were to ask you what your philosophy of life or your creed, what would that be?
Have a good time all the time.
And one aspect of this Space Defense Initiative possibility that you discussed, and I was surprised to see you touch on it in the book, but I was happy to see it also because I haven't really heard much research into it, was the Columbia crash and how that may tip the hand that it is a Space Defense Initiative. Can you talk a little about that?
Exactly. Well, it comes down to DARPA on their website lists 4 things they've done with HARP. And the first item, it's curious, they have a list of 4 things they've done with HARP in 3 bullets. And so this indicates that the first bullet, which has 2 items, you use it one way and you get 2 effects.
Yeah.
And these 2 effects seem rather radically rather radical departure, because one happens at the bottom of the ocean and the other happens outside the atmosphere. But there is a link between them, and I think I can explain it. And this is, the first bullet says, communicate with deeply submerged submarines and reduce the populations of charged particles in the radiation belts. Now, what happens is that HARP, as a field of antennas on the ground in southeastern Alaska, is now the world's largest radio broadcasting station with an effective radiated power of 3.6 million watts. But that it's not designed to broadcast for human ears. It's designed to inject all that energy into a spot at the top of the atmosphere. And the spot, according to some of the papers I've read, is about 12 miles across by about 2.5 miles deep by 50 or 90 miles up, depending on which mode they're using.
Yeah.
Now, when you inject 3.6 million watts into a spot that small, that heats the spot by several thousand degrees and literally blows the molecules of the atmosphere apart. When they blow apart, it creates a couple of phenomena, one of which is the binding force of the molecule gives off energy in a variety of ways, including in the radio frequency range as ELF, extremely low frequency radio waves, which penetrate deep into the sea. And so by pulsing the way that they blow apart the atmosphere, they can make the atmosphere do a staccato effect, do a virtual Morse code, which the submarines can read. Now, the other thing is that when you blow the molecules apart, you create a plasma, an electrically charged gas. And because of where it is in the atmosphere, which is at the very top of the atmosphere, it induces convection, warm rises, and it goes out into space. And since it's out in space, there's nothing to stop it, and it just keeps going until it hits the magnetic lines of force and gets trapped between the magnetic lines of force, which happens to be where the Van Allen belts are.
Yeah.
And so this plasma goes from the top of the atmosphere all the way out to the Van Allen belts, which means that it creates a plume of electrically charged gas that anything traveling through could be destroyed by. Basic Star Wars ground-based weapon shield. In this case, it's probably more likely to be used for spy satellites than incoming ICBMs, because the problem with ICBMs is that from the point of pushing the button over there and the Big Bang over here is between 18 and 22 minutes long.
Yeah.
And so, the whole thing about how to defend ourselves under attack is to be able to identify the boost phase and take them out in the ballistic phase and before they make reentry, because if they're MIRVed, they break apart into gazillions of targets and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So what HARP would do is take them out before reentry phase. Anything attempting to reenter would re-enter through the electrically charged gas, assuming we had enough time to put it up.
Yeah.
That's a hell of an assumption.
I know.
But it's more likely that we could put this thing up and tinker it so that we could take out passing spy satellites. So if we were about to launch something on the ground, we could poke out their eyes. Now, there is evidence that while communicating with the deeply submerged submarine fleet or for some other reason, HARP was up and running the night that Columbia re-entered. HARP was running for 90 minutes prior to loss of signal and continued running for another 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's quite possible that HAARP contributed to the destruction of the orbiter. And the evidence for this is from a couple of places. A number of folks have examined the official NASA investigation and concluded that the investigation was bogus, that it was politically motivated rather than science-driven, and that they came to a politically expedient explanation as opposed to a correct scientific explanation, and in fact buggered some of the evidence. I didn't go into the evidence that got buggered in the book because other people have done it elsewhere, and I simply direct the reader, if they're interested, to go there. Yeah. Particularly a website called Columbia's Sacrifice. And there's a link to it from my website. Columbia Sacrifice was put up by John Hicks, who is an engineer at Hughes Aircraft. And Hicks's specialty was orbiter reentry dynamics. And working at Hughes, his job was when things broke to find out why they broke. And so when the Columbia went down, he immediately went, "Oh, this is what I've trained my entire life to investigate," and went into it and found all these problems and concluded that the orbiter was not taken out by a burn through which systematically shut down system after system after system, but in fact everything, all the electronics went down simultaneously at a single event. And he concluded that that single event was hitting the HAARP plasma field.
Yeah. And you make a great point about HAARP in that just because people try to add elements to HAARP as part of conspiracy theory doesn't mean that the government's not doing it. It just might mean that it's not necessarily a part of HAARP. And that there's a lot of projects going on that we don't even know about, and it's just HAARP gets blamed just because we've heard about it.
Right, exactly. I bow to you. You said exactly what I would say on the subject.
Let's move on to the chemtrail versus contrail discussion. What sort of struck me is, like I said, I've really only done peripheral investigation into the chemtrail versus contrail situation. And just to clear this up, sort of, the real difference between a contrail and a chemtrail at the base of it all is that a contrail is what we know of as the stuff that comes out of the jet when it's flying around. And when you change it to a chemtrail, really it's that there's the added intentional spraying of something additional to the refuse from flying the jet, right? That's a sort of the main difference between the two, contrail and chemtrail.
Well, yeah, I could kind of go along with that. That's a rough paraphrasing of way I was putting it. I was kind of tiptoeing around it. I don't believe I came right out and gave a definition because there is this popular misconception that if the contrail persists, it is a chemtrail. And I say that with some trepidation. It is a misconception.
Yeah.
What I can prove is that the persistence of a contrail is not a marker of, not an indication of its contents. And so there is this theory that there is a covert spraying program going on, and the covert spraying program has been labeled chemtrails, because of these strangely persistent contrails that are seen across North America and Europe, and now virtually all the world. They've been seen in Antarctica. Now, the problem here is that we're dealing with those who are scientifically challenged, and those who, I believe there's also an element of intentional disinformation. Mm-hmm. I believe that a lot of the nonsense comes from official sources to discredit, because there is a spraying program, or rather there is a great deal of circumstantial evidence that I think if I were on an episode of Perry Mason, I'd win. There's enough circumstantial evidence to mount a successful case at law on this. As to whether it's real or not, boy, a lot of people have gotten hung on circumstantial evidence that turned out not to be too right. What I can prove is that there is global warming. the Earth is getting warmer. NASA can prove this. There is unfortunately a large number of theories about why the Earth is getting warmer, and the current latched-on cause célèbre is that greenhouse gases are causing the global warming. Now, the theory that greenhouse gases causes global warming is the only one talked about in the press because it quite literally is the policy of the press to only talk about it. I have friends who write for science magazines who have told me on the DNQ that they have been told by their editors that the scientific press now has a standing policy not to publish any material that is negative to the greenhouse gases cause global warming theory. So we're getting this theory shoved down our throat.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is that it has a lot of, it can make a number of people very serious political hay, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. What I can tell you is that because of global warming, because of this theory, there are mitigation efforts. And most people have heard of the Kyoto Protocols, and which grew out of the Earth Summit in Rio, which final publication of that was Agenda 21, which was the agenda for the 21st century, which is the driving document of our lives, and most people have never heard of it, much less have a clue what the United Nations intends to do with us via it. That's about as deep into conspiracy theory as I get in the book, is simply mentioning that it exists. And you can do your own due diligence to find out which concentration camp you're going to be sent to. What I can prove is that starting in 1979, famed physicist Freeman Dyson had this bright idea that if greenhouse gases are the real cause for global warming, and it really needs to have something done about it, one thing we could do was by making the Earth shinier, more solar energy would be reflected back into space. Less solar energy, less solar heat would get into the atmosphere, so that we could continue to lock up, generate more heat down here, and balance it out with less heat getting in. This comes under the heading of geoengineering. Geoengineering schemes have been bandied about since the late 1980s. After Freeman Dyson said it, it was about another decade before anybody really took it seriously.
Yeah.
The United States government actually started funding research into it almost immediately through Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Lawrence Livermore has spent better than 20 years tinkering with ideas of mitigation. And their conclusion was that if we inject shiny dust, particularly aluminum and barium, into the top of the atmosphere, this would increase the Earth's reflectivity enough to balance out the greenhouse gases. And Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb and associate director of Lawrence Livermore, presented this at a scientific workshop on global catastrophes and wrote an article about it for the Wall Street Journal. And as we now know, Lawrence Livermore has spent in excess of $200 million in investigating this, and other agencies, after Teller formally presented it, have looked at it, and we now have had major international scientific bodies of great repute, such as SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, and the United Nations IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have looked at this and said, yeah, hey, this would work. Yeah, we have the technology. It costs about $1 billion a year, but this would allow us to continue burning fossil fuels and so forth.
Yeah.
And all of the agencies who look at this thing all have come to the same but.
Yeah.
The environmental and legal hurdles and political problems would be so high that they could never do this and tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
And that's where the paper trail stops. And the evidence strongly supports that rather than saying, well, we can't do it, let's go on to something else, they actually have started doing it covertly. Now, there is some aspects to this that I found rather chilling, and I mentioned them very briefly. Again, the book is 400 pages of what I can prove with minimal speculation, almost no conspiracy theory. So when I came up on obvious conspiracy theories, I would put them in a couple of paragraphs and move on.
Yes.
And one of the ones I ran into was that a number of other scientific organizations had looked at these geoengineering schemes and said, but wait a minute, if you inject the dust too low in the atmosphere, instead of mitigating global warming, you'll exacerbate global warming.
Yeah.
And I suggest, what if they are doing it covertly on the pretext of saving us from global warming, but they're actually intentionally injecting it too low and so are exacerbating global warming as a pretext to shove a global bureaucracy, a.k.a. global government, down our throat.
Yeah.
Now, to get back to the beginning of this, there was the contrail versus chemtrail debate, and we kind of got off into the chemtrail side of it. But I want to say what I did is I spent about 100 pages divided about equally between contrails and chemtrails.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. Air Force says chemtrails are a hoax. It's all nonsense. That what you see, these persistent contrails you see, are just that. They're completely natural, completely normal. It's not a problem. Go away.
Yeah.
And they also say they're benign, and that is BS.
Yes.
The environmental disaster that is contrails is just beginning to bubble up in the collective consciousness of the scientific community. Just since the no-fly days of following September 11th, when they actually saw what contrails did and went, oh my goodness, have they realized that an awful lot of the clouds in the sky are man-made clouds?
Yeah.
And that we have the head of meteorology at MIT concluded that all the warming over North America for the last 20 years can be directly attributed to persistent contrails.
Yeah.
Now, there is also this whole thing, as we began this conversation, about whether a persistent contrail is a chemtrail or not. And I go at length into the science of what forms contrails, when contrails form, why they form, how they form, when they form, where they form, and what conditions are necessary. And what I discovered in the course of this is that when I first saw contrails, when I first saw chemtrails, it was 1996. I was writing the Hart book, and I spent a lot of the time lying in a lounge chair in my garden, thinking about what I was going to write and looking up at the sky.
Yeah.
And I saw these huge billowing contrails that just persisted forever. I mean, it just stayed there all day. And the blue sky of morning became a pearly white opalescence of afternoon. And it just amazed me that you get the 6 o'clock news guy would say, another lovely cloudless day, and the sky is freaking white. And I couldn't figure out whether, I was just too hungover to grasp what was going on, or the guy on the TV show was like really, really drunk. And so my first thought was, well, there are three possibilities. Either the jet fuel has changed, or the jet engines have changed, or the atmosphere itself has changed.
Yeah.
And in the course of researching this book, I discovered that it's all three. That the current generation of aircraft jet engine uses the high bypass turbofan, and that creates a condition that favors persistent contrails. Also, the JP8 fuel, and I don't go into the jet fuel. I mention it in passing, and then I don't go into it because I could not find good paperwork that I could understand well enough to be able to rewrite and regurgitate to my readers so that they could understand it too.
Yeah.
So I just put it out there and then kept on. And the other thing is the atmosphere is changing. With global warming, the air is getting warmer, or it should be getting warmer. Warmer air means able to hold more moisture. More moisture means more contrails. We've also discovered something called global dimming. Global dimming just hit on the scientists' view screens about 2002.
Yeah.
This is a wholly new and unexpected phenomena, but it's probably proof that there is a covert spraying program to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching us. If not, it indicates something else is going on with the atmosphere, and nobody has a clue what it might be. Certainly the atmosphere has changed, the jet fuel has changed, and the jet engines have changed, all of which contribute to the persistence of a contrail. And persistent contrails are not a brand new phenomena. I ran into one website with a guy on the website proudly proclaims that he explains in annoying detail how the covert spraying program began on December 7th, 1999.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, I assume that means he finally looked up on December 7th, 1999 and went, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
I've been seeing them since 96. My group was discussing them in 95. Generally, the term is credited with having been coined by William Thomas, but he used it in 98, so it had been around for quite a bit a while before he's allegedly coined it. I went on a research campaign to figure out. I watched old movies looking for persistent contrails, and the oldest one I could find was 1985, the opening scene of Murphy's Romance with James Garner and Sally Field.
Mm-hmm.
Garner is driving out across the Montana Big Sky country out to a ranch, and the Big Sky has a contrail, one contrail that takes up a third of the sky from horizon to horizon. Wow. Now, this is 1985. Now, I found that persistent contrails were actually a problem during World War II, that the stealthiness of bomber squadrons was compromised by leaving persistent contrails pointing back to the bases they'd taken off from.
Yeah, so the gist of a lot of it is that even if the chemtrail conspiracy or concept is not around, even if it's not real, which we think that probably there is evidence that it's going on, but even if it isn't, that there's a whole other branch here of the contrail that is real, that is a form of air pollution, and that definitely is happening.
Absolutely. I document the extreme problems caused by persistent contrails.
Yeah.
And that's so just what mainstream science is willing to recognize. We got a big problem.
Exactly.
That needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
That is not being addressed in the mainstream media. And it may be a smokescreen, if you will, to hide an even bigger problem, that there may indeed be a covert spraying program, and the covert spraying program may or may not be good for us.
Exactly, and also additionally, the contrail problem gets couched in with the chemtrail conspiracy, and then it gets even further pushed away from mainstream discussion.
Exactly. You call it a chemtrail, and you immediately get yourself lumped in with nutcases because the Air Force says it's a hoax. If you believe in a hoax, that means you're stupid.
Yeah. Oh, boy. And additionally, you make a good point here in the chemtrail-contrail discussion in the book, that based on the logistics of flights and all that stuff, that a lot of the more subversive fears with regards to contrails just may not have merit, as far as they're going to poison us, or they're putting fluoride in the air to make us breathe, or stuff like that. Just wouldn't reach people, or it wouldn't get to the targeted population if you were trying to do it in the form of a chemtrail. Not that there isn't pollutants and dangerous things in what they're trying to put in the air, but that sinister chemicals intentionally for ingestion of humans may not be what's going on.
Right. There are a good dozen theories as to why this spraying program is taking place. Mm-hmm. One of the theories is mitigate global warming. And so I cover that one in great detail and prove that there is a lot of scientific evidence to show that this could very well be taking place. Yeah. On the other hand, there are all these other theories, mm-hmm. and for most of them, I failed to find any usable material material in the open scientific or military literature.
Yeah.
I mean, this book is based on what I can prove.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can prove that there are one of the theories is that this is it's a good guy thing, that the United States government realizes that there are bad guy terrorists out there, and they are spraying they are inoculating us against the evil biotoxins that the terrorists intend to lay on us. And so we're all being covertly inoculated against the evil. The problem is, yes, there are patents for aerial release of inoculants, of vaccines.
Yeah.
But these are all designed to be released like crop dusting stuff, like at 100 feet above your head, not at 40,000 feet above your head. And I point out that the higher in the atmosphere something is released, the longer it stays in the atmosphere and the further it travels. And I give a couple of examples. One is, you may recall, I think it was around 02 or 03, the western third of the U.S. was blanketed in a haze for a week or two.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was in downtown Reno, Nevada, and we had near whiteout conditions in downtown for 3 days. You could not see the end of the block for 3 days.
Wow.
And people were like going, where's all this coming from? And it turned out there had been a dust storm in the Gobi Desert that had gotten a vast plume of dust up into the jet stream, and that this dust cloud that was visible from Canada to Arizona had traveled 7,000 plus miles from the Gobi Desert. You may have seen the TV specials on the coral die-offs in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Coral had been dying in the Caribbean for a few decades, and they've been trying to figure out what the problem was, and eventually they realized that it was dust mites that live in the dust in the Sahara Desert. Windstorms on the Sahara were picking dust up, carrying it across the Atlantic, and depositing it into the Caribbean, where the dust mites were killing the coral. So, and I give the example, if a United Airlines flight from Kansas to Chicago were trying to inoculate America against anthrax, the vaccine released at 29,000 feet would end up inoculating people in Spain, Portugal, and Poland but when it finally reached the ground.
Yeah. And to sort of bring the whole conversation back to the beginning again in a way, how extensive do you think this weather modification that's going on today is, and in what forms do you think it's going on that people could recognize? And that's kind of a big picture question, I know.
It's a big picture question, and to be perfectly honest, I have only the least I have a very small clue. Again, this is not readily available in the scientific press, and much less so in the military press. What we get in the military is once they have decided to put an object in the arsenal, we hear about it, such as the VMAD, the Vehicle-Mounted Active Denial System.
Yeah.
The Air Force just added it to their arsenal this year. The Marines added it to their arsenal in 03. And then we hear about things like Air Force 2025, where they're looking 30 years in the future to see what we're going to need. And so that's all very theoretical. Between in the arsenal right now and the theoretical is a huge gap. And I'm not privy to anything secret. I don't know anything secret. I don't want to know anything secret.
Yeah.
So you can look at a few things and make some guesses. I do quote at length from an article in Scientific American where a civilian scientist under government contract figured out how to move hurricanes, at least in his computer. His simulations allowed him to neatly control simulated hurricanes.
Yeah.
And he concluded that with the future technology, we should be able to do this to real hurricanes. And one can speculate, well, do we have the technology necessary to accomplish what he he's talking about. And in the open scientific literature, there's a big question mark. We may indeed have the technology, but it's far from. I'm not technical. I'm a professional writer. I know how to put periods. I know how to put sentences and words together. I'm a little vague on how to put weather weapons together.
Yeah. This mini question here sort of popped into my head. Are there HARP facilities in other countries? Do other countries have their own versions of HARP, or is HARP the only game in town as far as that sort of facility?
Well, you're going to get a lot of answers to that question depending on who you ask. As best I know, HARP uses the APTI patents, and so it is technically the only one capable of doing that.
Yeah.
However, they may have sublet the patent rights. There may be similar technologies under development. I know that there is a facility being built in Greenland that seems to be a mirror of the HARP technology, but somewhat different. There are a number of HARP technically is an ionospheric heater, and there are dozen or so ionospheric heaters in use around the world, though HARP is the only one that is acknowledged to have the unique patented ability to focus the energy coming out of the field.
Yeah, like that sort of patent right type of thing. Like if I was a sinister Russian, general or whatever, would you really have to adhere to the patents? Like could the Chinese really have to adhere to the APTI patents, or could they just build their own and be like, we don't know what you're talking about?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I would say that if you're a bad guy, you're going to do bad things.
There you go, yeah.
And as they say, locks only keep honest people honest.
Exactly. We just really scratched the surface here on the book, and there's just tons and tons of material in there, and I hope all the listeners definitely check it out and pick up the book, because, like I said, we just scratched the surface. There's a ton of material in there we haven't even talked about, and we haven't had a chance to talk about that is worthwhile reading for anybody interested in these branches of the esoteric. What do you have on your plate for the future? Last time we had you on, you were talking about this book, so maybe we can get a tease on what we may be hearing from you in the next episode.
Well, I'm actually still negotiating with a couple of publishers on what the next book is going to be, and I don't want to
tip your hand.
Yeah. I can say I am going to be one of the 10 featured speakers at Conspiracy Con this year. Mm-hmm. Memorial Day weekend, May 26, 27. I will be speaking in downtown San Jose, California, at the Crown Plaza Hotel at Conspiracy Con 7. Anybody who can get to California, I've been to Conspiracy Con a couple of times, and it is just always an amazing event with some of the top people on the planet. Every year, either Nick Begich or I are there. There's Jim Mars is often there. I mean, there's some heavy hitters there that I recommend your listeners join us.
Yeah, definitely. That's Conspiracy Con at the Crown Plaza Hotel in downtown San Jose, California, on May 26th, 27th, 2007, and you're going to be one of the featured speakers there talking about weather warfare, right?
Exactly.
And they can find our information on Conspiracy Con at www.conspiracycon.com. And, of course, the book here we're talking about on the episode was Weather Warfare, the Military's Plan to Draft Mother Nature. How can people pick it up? Through the website, or how about like Amazon and all that good stuff?
Everywhere.
Awesome.
If you want to get an autographed copy, buy it from Adventures Unlimited Press. You can go to our website at adventuresunlimitedpress.com or call our 1-800 number, 1-800-718-4514. That's 1-800-718-4514. If you want to get it cheap, you can get it from Amazon. Amazon has it at 30% off, so you can get it cheap from Amazon, but it won't be autographed.
Yep.
Best for me would be for you to go to your local bookseller.
Yeah.
If you get it from your local bookstore, that encourages them to stock and restock the book so that more people down the road will be exposed to it, so we'll get more sales down the road. But, if you're one of those people who need a buy now, buy it from Amazon or buy it from Adventures Adventures Unlimited Press right this minute, and I'm working at Adventures Unlimited Press, and I'll be happy to autograph a copy to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And people can find out more information on you and your previous books and all that good stuff at jerryesmith.com, JerryEsmith.com. Jerry, once again, it was great to have you on the program. Your depth of understanding and research into the conspiracy world is really just bar none one of the best I've heard in a long, long time, and it's always great talking to you and education in and of itself. So thanks for coming back on the show.
Well, thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
There you have it, folks. That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. Big thanks to Jerry E. Smith for coming back on the show. Hopefully we can have him back next year or whenever his next book comes out and have another discussion with him on esoterica at large. Of course, you can find out more information on Jerry E. Smith at his website, www.jerryesmith.com, JerryEsmith.com, all one word. Check it out. And the book, of course, is Weather Warfare, the military's plan to draft Mother Nature. And since I'm feeling better this week, we're going to dive on into Binnall of America Audio listener feedback. This one comes from John Ludi, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, L-U-D-I, John Ludi, who bills himself as the troubadour of the apocalypse, and includes a URL of johnludi.com. I presume that's the headquarters of the troubadour of the apocalypse. And let me spell that for you, johnludi.com, johnludi.com. Here's what he has to say. Tim, I just wanted to thank you for the excellent job you were doing. People who earnestly and honestly contribute to the world don't get enough props. That's in quotes. I've listened to pretty much all of your podcasts and have been greatly impressed with your level of thoughtfulness and intelligence in the way you conduct your show. In response to one theme that you have brought up several times, I do have an answer for you. The reason why young people under 30, are not involved in ufology is that they are quite abysmally stupid as a generation, with the exception of yourself and about another 0.03% of that particular demographic. They are far too busy fighting virtual aliens on their PS3s to be bothered with the real ones, and their rudimentary intelligence are preoccupied with American Idol and how many shifts at Starbucks it will take before they can afford a boob job. Their sense of history only goes back about a week or so, and their understanding of the world beyond their peer groups and what they get from the mainstream media is enough to fill a thimble. They are even less educated than Gen Xers, and that is saying a lot. They are our future, and thus we are doomed. Anyway, great show. Keep it up. The world needs more Tim Binnalls in it. John Ludi, the troubadour of the apocalypse, johnludi.com. And that's Ludi with spelled L-U-D-I, johnludi.com. Well, John, what a dismal letter you've sent me, but I will respond. First of all, thank you for the props. I appreciate it. Hope you checked out my interview on Red Ice and got a chance to hear what I have to say on a variety of esoteric topics. You know, I do what I do. As far as young people go, I tend not to disagree with you in some sense. I think that many of the young people, 18 to 25 maybe, are, for the most part, retarded, with obvious exceptions, like the ones who are listening to this program and people who are just generally smart enough to have an interest and pursue it and not be bogged down in trying to fit in with, the life they've been sold by MTV. And I think you do raise a good point if we draw this into the ufology discussion and why young people aren't gravitating towards ufology. Not only is ufology doing a bad job of recruiting, but the recruitment pool in and of itself, as you point out, is awful. So the whole scenario boils down to a blind man looking for a needle in a haystack. We persevere, and hopefully more people will come to ufology, more young people. There is a vacuum in that area of the field, and I get emails from young people a lot. I'm surprised now. I think as we've pushed this message here on Binnall of America Audio that young people now are coming to us and contacting us. And I'm getting your emails, folks. Just trust me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm bombarded at times as it is. So they're out there. I think maybe more organization would help. I don't know. There's no point in going off on a ramble. I hear your thoughts, John Ludi. I have a little more faith than you, but at the same time, it's probably blind faith and cautious optimism, I guess. But certainly it's an uphill battle. If you want to be a part of Binnall of America Audio listener feedback, go to binnallofamerica.com. Click the contact button in the top right-hand corner. There's a goofy picture there and all the information you need to contact us here at binnallofamerica.com. or simply write to BOAAudio@hotmail.com, BOAAudio@hotmail.com. Either one of those methods will put your correspondence on the road to appearing on Binnall of America Audio Listener Feedback. Also, check out the USOV.com, that's the Binnall of America message board, if you want to discuss the show, discuss particular episodes, or just talk about esoterica in general. Definitely check out the Binnall of America message board, www.theusofe.com, THEUSOFE.com. Moving right along now, it's time for the thanks. Leslie, Chiron, Arlie, Jovi, and Ralph Molesworth, they're the BinnallofAmerica.com staff. They are the heart and soul of this operation. Thank you to the great staff at BOA. BinnallofAmerica.com. Make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. What we do here is not easy. It takes time and it takes money, which is why we have a PayPal button at BinnallofAmerica.com. If you appreciate what we do with Binnall of America Audio and BinnallofAmerica.com, and you want to help support the series and the website, click the PayPal button at BinnallofAmerica.com and make a donation. Next week on Binnall of America Audio, Farah Yurduzu, Turkey's first female ufologist. We're going to go international again, folks, and it is going to be a wild ride. Farah Yurduzu tells us about an amazing array of esoteric material from the country of Turkey. We're going to be dealing in UFOs, ancient underground cities, Turkish history and how it relates to various aspects of esoterica, including ET contact and shapeshifters, UFO landings and sightings in Turkey, what branch of esoteric research hasn't made the leap over to Turkey yet, also Turkish men in black, you know those old rumors about Noah's Ark being on Mount Ararat in Turkey. We're going to get Farah's perspective on that story. And, of course, tons and tons more. After we taped this one and I got a chance to listen to it again, I was just amazed at all the different areas of esoterica we cover, all emanating from Turkey and just getting an amazing alternative perspective to what we already know about the esoteric. That's going to be next week at BinnallofAmerica.com. I swear I'm going to have the preview up at BOA soon, and we will have a Jerry E. Smith one, I promise. I guess at this point we'd have to call it a recap, but we'll have it up at BinnallofAmerica.com, and the Farah Yurduzu preview soon, I promise. We're almost back to firing on all cylinders, so bear with us and enjoy the bumpy ride. And on that note, we wrap up the week. Thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. Until you hear from me next week, this is Tim Binnall, signing off.